Jordan Sinclair was 29 the night her father tried to shrink her back into childhood in front of 30 relatives seated around the Sinclair Thanksgiving table. The long oak dining table, polished to a courtroom shine, stretched between them like a battlefield disguised as family tradition. Jordan had asked a single question, softly, politely, about her grandmother Eleanor's estate. She barely finished the sentence before Robert Sinclair rose from his chair, towering over the room with the stern authority he once used as a state judge. "You have no business discussing legal matters you don't understand," he barked, his voice slicing through the chatter like a blade. Laughter spread around the table, the uncomfortable kind that people use as a shield. Grant Sinclair, polished and smug, smirked at her with the confidence of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. "Let Dad handle it, Jordan," he said. "It's too complex for you." Jordan felt heat climb her throat, but she kept her spine straight. She refused to flinch when Robert jabbed a finger toward the staircase and announced, "You're grounded. Go think about your place in this family." Someone snorted. Someone whispered, "At 29? Jordan looked directly at her father, her expression steady, unreadable. "All right, Dad," she said calmly. She stood up, excused herself without trembling hands, and walked away. No one noticed how quietly she closed the door behind her. No one noticed that earlier that morning, she had discovered something hidden inside Eleanor Sinclair's old jewelry box. A sealed directive addressed to Jordan alone, containing instructions Eleanor had written years ago. Instructions Jordan had not yet dared to open, but which now felt less like a mystery and more like a warning fulfilled. At dawn, Robert Sinclair walked down the hallway with the swagger of a man who believed he had restored order. He straightened the cuffs of his pressed shirt, rehearsing the speech he planned to give Jordan about obedience, gratitude, and remembering who built this family. But when he opened her bedroom door, the air inside the room felt wrong. Too still, too empty. The closet hung open, the hangers bare. Her suitcase was gone. The bed was perfectly made. Nothing remained except a single envelope resting on the nightstand, propped upright as if waiting for him. His chest tightened. He stepped forward and picked it up. Inside was a single line written in Eleanor Sinclair's elegant, trembling script. "If she leaves, Robert, it means you forced her hand again." Again. The word landed like a verdict he was not prepared to hear. He crushed the note in his fist just as the doorbell echoed through the quiet house. Marilyn Sinclair hurried to answer it, her robe pulled tightly around her shoulders. Standing on the porch was a man in a charcoal suit. His leather briefcase held like a shield. "Mr. Sinclair," he said in a controlled voice. "I'm Charles Kensington, attorney for the late Eleanor Sinclair. I need to speak with your family immediately." Robert stiffened. "This isn't a good time." Charles adjusted his glasses. "Your mother wrote a sealed directive outlining a series of concerns regarding mishandled funds and undisclosed accounts. She instructed me to deliver it only under specific conditions. Those conditions appear to have been met." The color drained from Robert's face. Marilyn covered her mouth with one trembling hand. "What conditions?" she whispered. Charles Kensington stepped inside. "The moment your daughter walked out of this house." 3 months earlier, Jordan had been awake long before sunrise, sketching the slope of a rooftop garden she was designing for a client in downtown Portland. She had barely slept in weeks. Eleanor's health had been declining, and the unspoken tension in the Sinclair family had thickened like fog. At precisely 6:14 a.m., her phone buzzed. It was her mother. "Jordan, sweetheart, it's your grandmother," Marilyn whispered, her voice thin with exhaustion. "She passed this morning." Jordan didn't answer right away. She stared at the delicate pencil lines on her drafting paper, her chest tightening. "I'm coming," she finally said. She grabbed her coat and drove through steady gray rain toward the hospital, gripping the steering wheel hard enough that her knuckles whitened. When she arrived, she found her father talking briskly on the phone about timelines and asset management, words that felt painfully cold in a hallway containing her grandmother's last breaths. Grant stood beside him, impeccably dressed even at dawn, nodding like Robert's favorite understudy. Do we need to notify the bank first? Grant asked. Or the firm? Robert waved him off. I'll handle everything. Jordan approached slowly. Neither man looked at her until she was almost beside them. Robert ended his call without saying goodbye and exhaled sharply. You took your time, he muttered. Jordan ignored the comment. She stepped into Eleanor's room, took her grandmother's cool hand and whispered, I'm here. A nurse approached her quietly. She wanted you to have this, the nurse said, handing Jordan a sealed cream envelope. She told us not to give it to anyone else. Jordan stared at it, her heartbeat loud in her ears. Eleanor's name was written in fading ink. She slipped it into her coat pocket, unaware of how deeply its contents would fracture the Sinclair family months later. Eleanor Sinclair's funeral was held inside an old Portland church with stone walls that seemed to swallow sound. The sanctuary glowed with white lilies, their scent mixing with cold December air. The pews filled with relatives, colleagues, and longtime community members who remembered Eleanor as the quiet force behind the Sinclair name. When it came time for the eulogy, Robert Sinclair stepped forward with the posture of a man born for podiums. But instead of speaking about Eleanor, the woman who raised him, who funded his education, who kept the family afloat long before he became a judge, Robert delivered a speech about legacy, about image, about responsibility. My son Grant will continue what my mother and I built, he declared, voice firm. He mentioned Grant by name 4 times, Marilyn once, and never said Jordan's name at all. Jordan sat motionless, but inside her chest something knotted into steel. After the service, people lined up to offer condolences. Her Aunt Victoria hugged her tightly. Her Uncle Leonard pressed her shoulder. But when an unfamiliar older man stepped forward, silver hair, wire-framed glasses, his voice was soft. Your grandmother admired your mind, he said. She told me you see structure where others see disorder. Jordan tried to ask who he was, but he simply replied, You'll understand soon, before disappearing into the crowd. That evening, at the gathering inside the Sinclair home, Robert stood at the head of the dining table and announced that Eleanor had placed him in charge of all family assets. He tapped his wine glass and glanced at Jordan. Some responsibilities require a steadier hand, he said. Grant smirked. Marilyn stared at her plate. And Jordan felt a slow fire build behind her ribs, a fire that finally pushed her to open Eleanor's sealed directive later that night. Jordan sat on the edge of her childhood bed, the one beneath the framed architectural sketches Eleanor insisted she hang years ago. She held the cream envelope tightly, afraid of what it might contain and more afraid of not knowing. When she finally broke the seal, a thin letter slid out, 2 pages long, edges worn as if handled many times. The handwriting was Eleanor's, elegant, looping, determined. If you are reading this, it began, then something unfolded exactly as I feared. You must listen carefully, Jordan. There are truths in this family buried under pride, control, and silence. Jordan's throat tightened. The next lines revealed something she could never have predicted. Eleanor suspected that funds from her private accounts had been mishandled years earlier, withdrawals authorized without her consent, documents altered in ways she had quietly documented but never confronted outright. She wrote that she believed Robert and Grant were preparing to dispute her designated beneficiary and override her wishes after her passing. Included was a partial photocopy of a legal instrument titled, Irrevocable Directive Concerning Financial Misconduct Review. The document referenced sealed statements left with her attorney, Charles Kensington, to be opened only under specific circumstances. Circumstances Eleanor outlined in a final line that made Jordan's heart pound. This directive becomes active the moment you are publicly belittled, dismissed, or denied rightful information about my estate. Jordan exhaled shakily. She folded the papers, placed them back into the envelope and whispered, You knew. Something within her steadied. Something long bent began to straighten. For the first time in her life, Jordan didn't feel powerless in the Sinclair house. She felt prepared. The night after the funeral gathering, the Sinclair house felt colder than usual. Jordan lay awake, replaying every word of Eleanor's letter. She could still hear her grandmother's steady voice beneath the ink, warning her that legacy was not always made of money. It was sometimes made of secrets. When dawn arrived, Jordan drove back to Portland, her mind racing with questions she couldn't yet shape into sentences. Her apartment welcomed her with silence, her drafting table covered in sketches, her coffee mug cold from 2 days earlier, her plants reaching toward the gray November light. She placed Eleanor's directive on the table and read it again slowly, looking for anything she had missed. One line stood out like a beacon. My attorney, Charles Kensington, holds the sealed statements. He will know what to do when the time comes. Jordan whispered the name to herself as if testing its weight. She opened her laptop and searched for him. His profile appeared immediately. Solo practitioner, specializing in estate law and fiduciary disputes. His headshot matched the silver-haired man who spoke to her at the funeral. Jordan hovered over his phone number but didn't press call. Fear wasn't what stopped her. It was skepticism. What if she misunderstood? What if Eleanor had been mistaken? And worse, what if exposing the truth shattered her family beyond repair? She closed the laptop. She wasn't ready. Instead, she threw herself into her work at the landscape design firm. As December approached, she buried her exhaustion beneath deadlines. But no matter how busy she kept herself, Eleanor's warning clawed at her. Jordan wasn't ready to confront anyone yet, but she kept the directive close, folded into a hidden pocket inside her work bag like a small shield she wasn't ready to raise. Weeks passed, and the tension in the Sinclair family settled into a dangerous quiet. Jordan tried to ignore it, but one evening, while checking emails for a rooftop garden project, she found something that made her stomach drop. Buried between 2 newsletters was a forwarded chain of messages. The sender was Grant. The subject line read, Revised Beneficiary Proposal. Draft only. Jordan's heartbeat surged. She opened the thread. What she saw wasn't a proposal. It was a calculated strategy. Grant had drafted a petition asking the court to reassign Eleanor's primary beneficiary to him. He accused Jordan of financial irresponsibility, unstable career decisions, and insufficient professional maturity to manage long-term assets. Robert replied in the thread, We move forward. She won't fight it. She never does. Jordan stared at the screen, her breath shallow. So this was their plan. So this was why Eleanor had prepared those sealed statements. She took screenshots immediately, time-stamped and saved them in a secure drive. Her hands shook as she whispered, They think I won't fight. That night, the weight of their betrayal pressed heavily on her chest, but beneath it, something else stirred. Resolve. The next morning, she called her mother. Marilyn's voice trembled when Jordan mentioned Thanksgiving plans. Your father wants everyone home, she said, sounding more like someone relaying orders than extending invitations. Jordan paused, then said evenly, Tell him I'll be there. She hung up without explaining why. For the first time in her life, she wasn't returning home to keep peace. She was returning to prepare for war. Quietly, strategically, and with the kind of evidence Eleanor Sinclair had believed she would one day be brave enough to use. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving, Jordan packed lightly. Just a coat, a small bag, and the envelope containing Eleanor's directive. She hesitated before leaving her apartment, looking back at the drafting table that had seen her through countless sleepless nights. I'll finish this, she whispered, unsure whether she meant the rooftop garden or the fight ahead. The Sinclair estate was already lit when she arrived. White columns glowed against the dusk, and cars lined the street like a parade of expectations. Marilyn answered the door with a tremor in her smile. Jordan, you look tired, she said, brushing a strand of hair from Jordan's face. Jordan managed a small smile. It's been a long month. From the living room, Grant's voice boomed. Hey, look who decided to show up. He strolled in, wine glass in hand, wearing an expression that suggested he believed the world, and the estate, already belonged to him. Jordan's gaze flicked to Robert, seated in his leather chair with a glass of aged cab in hand. You came, he said, not as observation but as disappointment. Jordan took a seat quietly, letting the room settle around her. She slid Eleanor's envelope beneath a stack of magazines when no one was watching. Evan Rhodes, her cousin, caught her eye and gave a small supportive nod. He didn't know anything, but he sensed something was coming. The house filled with relatives. The clinking of glasses, murmurs of small talk, the scent of rosemary stuffing. Jordan helped set the table while Marilyn and Aunt Victoria watched her with a protective sorrow she didn't fully understand. She wasn't here for reconciliation. She was here because Eleanor Sinclair had believed she could stand her ground, even in a house where she had spent her entire life being told not to. Thanksgiving morning unfolded like a performance. 31 relatives crowded into the Sinclair dining room, the oak table stretching beneath gleaming silverware. Robert Sinclair stood at the head, basking in the attention as he delivered a speech about legacy, responsibility, and the strength of family leadership. "I'll be making an important announcement this afternoon regarding my mother's estate," he declared, lifting his wine glass as though issuing a decree. "I expect everyone to be present." Grant sat beside him, smirking confidently. Marilyn kept her gaze fixed on her napkin, twisting it with trembling fingers. Jordan sat at the far end, quietly observing every shift in expression. When dessert was served, she excused herself to wash dishes in the kitchen. Her hands were submerged in warm, sudsy water when she sensed someone behind her. Grant leaned against the doorway, swirling his wine casually. "You should really be grateful," he said, voice oozing false warmth. "Dad's been patient with you, but you're making things hard on yourself. Just let him handle the estate. It's not your lane." Jordan didn't turn around. "Grant," she said softly, "do you know what Grandma left for me?" His grip on the wine glass tightened. "She left things to all of us," he replied quickly. "You're not special." Jordan shut off the faucet and dried her hands slowly. "She left me more than you think." The color drained from his face. He didn't respond. Instead, he turned sharply and stormed back into the living room. Minutes later, Robert's voice thundered, "Jordan, get in here now." When she stepped into the living room, 30 faces turned toward her, some confused, some amused, some bracing for another Sinclair spectacle. Robert stood in the center of the room like a judge preparing to deliver a sentence. "What did you say to your brother?" he demanded, pointing at her as though she were an unruly defendant. "You think you can manipulate this family, threaten your way into decisions you're not equipped to understand." He didn't give her time to answer. "Enough. You're grounded. Again. Go to your room." The room burst into awkward laughter, an instinctive reflex the Sinclair family had perfected over decades. Jordan's pulse throbbed at her temples, but her expression remained serene. "All right," she said softly. She turned and walked up the stairs with deliberate calm. Behind her she heard whispers, Marilyn's sob catching in her throat, Aunt Victoria saying sharply, "Robert, that's enough," and Evan murmuring, "This isn't right." Jordan closed her bedroom door and leaned against it, breathing slowly. She knew what would happen next. Robert would believe he had won again. He would believe she had retreated. But he didn't know she had already made her decision the moment she walked into Eleanor's room 3 months earlier. She retrieved her phone, scrolled to Charles Kensington's number, and pressed call. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Sinclair." "Mr. Kensington," she said quietly. "I'm ready for the truth." There was a long pause on the line. "Then everything begins tomorrow," Charles replied. 8 a.m. sharp. "Be prepared." Jordan ended the call, placed the phone beside Eleanor's letter, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. Downstairs, her family celebrated. Upstairs, she prepared. Calmly, quietly, and for the first time in her life without fear. Jordan left the Sinclair house at 4:12 a.m., long before the rest of the family stirred. She moved silently, slipping her coat on in the hallway as the furnace hummed and the old floorboards groaned under her familiar steps. She carried only her small bag and the envelope containing Eleanor's directive. The cold morning air bit her cheeks when she stepped outside. She didn't slam the door or leave a note. She didn't need to. The stillness of her exit was the first declaration of independence she had ever made inside that house. She drove to a 24-hour diner 10 minutes away and ordered a cup of coffee she never touched. Instead, she watched condensation drip down the windows while replaying her father's rage, Grant's fear, and her grandmother's warning. At 7:43 a.m. her phone buzzed. A message from Marilyn. "Your father is looking for you. Please come home." A second message arrived from Evan Rhodes. "What's happening? Are you okay?" Jordan replied to neither. At precisely 8 a.m. the diner door opened, and Charles Kensington stepped inside, scanning the booths until his eyes found hers. He approached slowly, placing his briefcase on the table with deliberate care. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted, sliding into the seat across from her. "Your grandmother anticipated these events, and she prepared materials that will change everything." Jordan's throat tightened. "I need to know everything, Mr. Kensington." He nodded. "You will. But once you begin this path, you won't be able to return to the life you knew." Jordan met his gaze steadily. "I wasn't planning on going back." Charles opened the briefcase. Inside lay folders, sealed statements, financial records, Eleanor's notarized letters, documents heavy enough to fracture the Sinclair legacy completely. "Then we start now," he said. Back at the Sinclair home, the morning unraveled into chaos. At 7:30 a.m., Robert Sinclair descended the staircase dressed in a crisp shirt and polished shoes, expecting obedience waiting at the breakfast table. Instead, he found only silence. "Someone wake Jordan," he said, pouring coffee into his favorite monogrammed mug. No one moved. Marilyn hesitated, then approached the stairs. But Robert, impatient, brushed past her and marched up himself. He knocked twice on Jordan's door. Sharp, authoritative knocks that had commanded obedience all her life. "Jordan," he called, "come downstairs. We're settling things today." No response. He turned the knob. The room was immaculate. Bed made. Closet empty. Desk cleared. Eleanor's framed sketch still hung on the wall, but the only object left on the nightstand was the battered picture frame containing Jordan's childhood photo with Eleanor. It lay face down, a message more cutting than any argument. Robert froze, anger draining into confusion. "She left," he muttered. He descended the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. "She's gone," he announced to the 20 relatives lingering over breakfast casseroles and lukewarm coffee. Whispers rippled through the dining room. "Gone," Marilyn echoed, her voice cracking. Grant looked up from his laptop with a smug exhale. "Well," he said, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve, "that solves it." Robert nodded stiffly. "It certainly does." He straightened his tie and declared, "We proceed with the estate announcement at 10. Without interruptions." But before he could elaborate, the doorbell rang. Aunt Victoria called from the hallway. "Robert? Someone's here." When the door opened, the first thing the family saw was a leather briefcase, then Charles Kensington. His expression was grave. "I need to speak with all of you," he said. "Immediately." The Sinclair dining room fell silent as Charles Kensington stepped inside, the air around him carrying the weight of unwelcome truth. 30 sets of eyes followed him as he placed his briefcase on the linen-covered table, right beside a tray of untouched breakfast pastries. Robert rose from his chair with forced composure. "Charles," he said sharply, "this is a private family event. You were not invited." Charles removed his glasses and wiped them calmly. "Eleanor Sinclair instructed me to appear precisely under these circumstances." Murmurs spread through the room. Marilyn clutched her robe tightly. Grant narrowed his eyes. Robert crossed his arms. "What circumstances?" he demanded. Charles opened the briefcase, revealing organized stacks of documents, some sealed, others marked with official state stamps. "Your mother suspected financial interference with her accounts. She believed someone attempted to alter the structure of her estate without her consent. She documented her concerns. she filed sworn statements. And she entrusted me with instructions to investigate should certain events occur. Aunt Victoria leaned forward. What events? Charles looked at her gently before turning to face Robert. A direct attempt to undermine her chosen beneficiary. Pattern of manipulation. And the public humiliation of that beneficiary in front of multiple witnesses. The room went still. Robert's face twitched. This is absurd, he snapped. My mother was confused in her final years. She misinterpreted routine transactions. She was not confused, Charles countered softly. She passed a cognitive evaluation 6 months before these documents were drafted. He pulled out a notarized statement. This is her signature. Clear. Steady. Deliberate. The room shifted. Even Grant's confident posture faltered. Robert took a step forward, jaw tight. Get out. Now. Charles didn't move. Not until I honor Eleanor Sinclair's final directive. Across the room, Marilyn covered her mouth as tears gathered in her eyes. Charles Kensington opened a thick folder labeled, Confidential. Sinclair Estate Review. The seal cracked as he peeled it back. Gasps rippled across the room. Contained in these documents, Charles said, are detailed notes your mother kept regarding discrepancies in her financial accounts spanning nearly a decade. He spread the pages across the table. Bank statements, signatures, transaction records, each one meticulously highlighted in Eleanor's tight handwriting. She believed someone close to her accessed funds she never authorized. Robert's jaw clenched. I handled her finances, he growled. Exactly, Charles replied. Aunt Victoria inhaled sharply. Robert shot her a glare, but Victoria didn't look away. She folded her arms. Eleanor mentioned concerns to me once, she admitted quietly. I didn't understand the details, but she said she was keeping records because she expected resistance. The room stirred again. Grant slammed his laptop shut. This is a spectacle, he snapped. We don't need to sit here while you spin conspiracies. Charles tilted his head. Then perhaps you'll explain this. He held up a printed email, the last message in Grant and Robert's chain. She won't fight it. She never does. Marilyn gasped. Robert lunged forward. Where did you get that? Charles didn't flinch. Jordan received this chain by accident. She preserved it. Forwarded it to herself. Printed it. The relatives exchanged expressions of horror, confusion, and dawning clarity. Leonard Shaw whispered. She knew something was wrong. Victoria nodded gravely. She knew, and she prepared her granddaughter. Robert's voice cracked. This is a violation. She stole private correspondence. Charles corrected him gently. No, Mr. Sinclair. She saved evidence of a breach of fiduciary duty. Silence fell, heavy, suffocating. It was the kind of silence that precedes seismic shifts. And then Marilyn spoke, her voice trembling. Robert, what did you do? Robert opened his mouth, but no answer formed. His eyes darted from the sealed statements to Charles's calm gaze to Grant's stiff posture. For the first time, the mask he had worn for decades cracked. Not out of anger but out of fear. Charles continued. Before she died, Eleanor completed a sworn deposition describing her concerns. In it, she states clearly that her granddaughter, Jordan Sinclair, is the sole intended beneficiary of her irrevocable directive. She feared her son and grandson might attempt to distort her legacy. He unfolded another document, this one bearing the state seal. She also included instructions for me to intervene should Jordan be intimidated, silenced, or denied information about her rightful inheritance. Marilyn let out a sob she had been holding for years. Robert raised a trembling hand to his forehead. This is all a misunderstanding, he insisted weakly. But even he sounded unconvinced. Across the room, Aunt Victoria stood. Enough, she said sharply. Eleanor trusted Jordan. She didn't trust the two of you. Grant stepped forward, posture rigid. We acted in the family's best interest, he argued. Charles inclined his head. Then why file a petition claiming you could not locate Jordan when she lived 15 minutes away and attended every family event? Grant faltered. Dad told me. No. Robert snapped, panic filling his eyes. But it was too late. The implication hung in the air. They had acted together and they had lied together. Marilyn whispered. Jordan was right. For the first time in decades, Robert Sinclair had no audience willing to clap for him, no courtroom to dominate, and no narrative he could shape. In the absence of control, he fell silent. And in that silence, everyone finally heard the truth Eleanor had been trying to protect. The room remained frozen after Grant's slip, as though the walls themselves were listening. Robert sank slowly into his chair, rubbing his temples with trembling fingers. He looked smaller than Jordan had ever seen him, even though she wasn't there to witness it. Charles Kensington folded his hands calmly. Mr. Sinclair, your mother expected this resistance. She told me verbatim that the truth would only surface when you finally pushed Jordan too far. Marilyn wiped her tears with the sleeve of her robe. Robert, she whispered, you promised me everything was clean. You promised, Robert snapped. I didn't do anything wrong. But his voice lacked conviction. Charles raised an eyebrow. Then the court will have no issue reviewing the sealed statements, the notarized deposition, and the full financial audit Mrs. Sinclair prepared. The relatives murmured uneasily. Cousin Evan looked toward the doorway, as if expecting Jordan to walk in at any moment. Where is she? Aunt Victoria asked quietly. She should hear this. Charles answered. Jordan met with me this morning. She knows exactly what's happening. That single sentence struck the room like lightning. Grant's fists clenched. She planned this. Charles corrected him. She prepared. As her grandmother instructed her to. Robert stood and slammed a hand against the back of his chair. This is a disgrace. I will not let you come into my house and— This house, Charles said gently, was purchased solely with Eleanor Sinclair's inheritance. It is part of her irrevocable directive. Gasps erupted. Robert staggered. The truth wasn't just near, it was closing in. 2 hours later, Jordan returned to the Sinclair property, unaware of the chaos that awaited her. She parked 1 block away, just as Charles instructed, and slipped the envelope deeper into her coat. Her boots crunched against the frosty lawn as she approached the colonial facade she'd grown up under. White pillars, black shutters, the illusion of stability. She paused on the porch, listening. The murmurs inside were sharp, frantic, fractured. She opened the door quietly. Every conversation died instantly. 30 relatives turned toward her as though she were a final verdict walking into the room. Marilyn rose first, eyes red and swollen. Jordan, sweetheart. But Jordan's gaze went straight to Charles. Is it time? She asked. He gave a solemn nod. Robert stepped forward, face stormy. You think you can ambush your own family? Jordan didn't flinch. No. Grandma did. Silence collapsed around them. Grant scoffed. You're overreacting, Jordan. You've always. She cut him off with a steady voice. I read your emails. Grant's mouth snapped shut. Jordan placed the envelope on the table beside Charles's briefcase. Grandma suspected funds were being moved behind her back. She documented everything. And she trusted me to protect her wishes. Robert barked. You think you're capable of managing an estate? You can barely manage yourself. Jordan stepped closer, eyes unwavering. You repeat that because you need it to be true. Then she looked around the room, her aunts, uncles, cousins, witnesses who had watched her be dismissed for years. But you're wrong. Charles opened the envelope. The shift had begun. Charles retrieved the final sealed statement, a document Eleanor wrote just 6 months before her death. Its envelope bore a red wax seal pressed with Eleanor's initials. Charles cracked it open with deliberate care. This, he said, is your mother's final signed directive. Robert scoffed, but it was a hollow sound. Charles read aloud. If this directive is being presented, it means my granddaughter has been denied fair access to information regarding her inheritance. Under these conditions, all trusteeship rights of Robert Sinclair are revoked pending court review. Gasps filled the room. Charles continued. All claims by Grant Sinclair to any portion of my irrevocable directive are to be invalidated immediately. Grant stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. She was manipulated. Manipulated by whom? Charles asked quietly. Her records. Her physician. Her bank officer. Grant's lips parted but produced no answer. Charles placed the document flat on the table. Furthermore, he continued, Eleanor Sinclair designated temporary trusteeship to my office until Jordan Sinclair is formally acknowledged as the sole beneficiary. The relatives, once spectators, now watched every shift of emotion. Marilyn stepped toward Jordan, tears filling her eyes. Honey, I didn't know. Jordan softened, she believed her. Robert, however, wasn't done. He pointed toward the table. This isn't over. I will contest every signature. Charles met his fury with quiet steel. You're welcome to contest. But you'll be contesting against your mother's sworn deposition, medical evaluations, financial audits, and years of documented notes, kept because she feared exactly this. Robert faltered. Words abandoned him. For a man who had dominated every room he entered, silence was the harshest defeat. And the room felt it. Jordan finally stepped into the center of the room, exactly where her father once expected her to shrink. But there was no shrinking now. I'm not here to punish anyone, she said softly but firmly. I'm here because Grandma asked me to protect what mattered to her. Her voice held steady authority, surprising even herself. She trusted me to see what others overlooked. Aunt Victoria nodded slowly. Jordan, your grandmother always spoke highly of your instincts. Jordan swallowed. She left something else. She opened her coat pocket and pulled out a smaller handwritten note Eleanor had tucked into the directive. This is her last message to me. She unfolded it. Jordan, I built this family's foundation, but only you can rebuild its integrity. Where others see bloodlines, you see truth. Do not let fear decide your future. Marilyn covered her face and cried openly. Grant stared at the floor, his shoulders tense. Robert took a step toward Jordan. You're twisting her words, he said hoarsely. Jordan met his gaze evenly. I'm reading them. Charles stepped beside her. Mrs. Sinclair's deposition explicitly states that she feared both you and Grant would attempt to override her wishes. She prepared this directive years ago. He addressed the family directly. Today is not about drama. It is about honoring Eleanor Sinclair's final instructions. Evan Rhodes walked to Jordan's side and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. We're with you, he murmured. Jordan felt a shift, like a dam breaking after decades of pressure. And for the first time, every eye in the room wasn't watching her with condescension or disbelief. They were watching her with recognition. Robert Sinclair's world began to crack in real time. His voice wavered when he finally said, You can't just take my house, my authority, everything I built. Charles responded calmly, This house was never yours. The deed lists Eleanor as the sole owner. Under her directive, ownership transfers to Jordan Sinclair. The room gasped again. Grant's face drained. The house, he whispered. Robert swayed, gripping the back of a chair. She wouldn't. She did, Charles said gently. Because she believed legacy must be earned, not inherited by entitlement. Jordan inhaled slowly, steadying herself. She looked at her father, not with triumph, but with a quiet sadness that pierced deeper than anger ever could. Dad, she said softly, you didn't lose the house today. You lost it the moment you stopped listening to her. Robert's expression hardened with denial, then dissolved into something unfamiliar, something raw. Marilyn stepped forward. Jordan isn't taking anything from you, Robert. You took from her. 4 years. He snapped. You're siding with her now? I'm standing with the truth, she replied. Aunt Victoria's voice cut through the tension. We will support whatever Eleanor intended. And Eleanor intended Jordan to lead. Grant strode to the door suddenly, grabbing his coat. "I won't be part of this circus," he muttered. Meredith, his wife, hesitated behind him, then quietly removed her wedding ring and set it on the table. "I didn't sign up for lies," she whispered. Grant froze, then fled the house. Robert watched helplessly as the life he controlled fractured at the seams. For the first time, he was the one left behind. The formal legal proceedings began the following Monday. Charles Kensington filed 3 petitions: the removal of Robert Sinclair as trustee, the invalidation of Grant's petition, and the immediate recognition of Jordan as the rightful beneficiary. The evidence was overwhelming. Eleanor's deposition, medical evaluations confirming full cognitive function, financial discrepancies she documented meticulously, and the incriminating email chain Grant had carelessly forwarded. Jordan attended each meeting quietly, her presence steady, her voice calm when asked questions. Robert attended too, but each session drained him further. His attorney tried to argue Eleanor had been confused in her final months. Charles presented video testimony proving her clarity. Grant attempted to deny authorship of his emails. Digital forensic verification dismantled the lie in minutes. Marilyn sat beside Jordan during the hearings, silent but resolute. When asked if she had known about the financial discrepancies, she shook her head with shame trembling through her voice. "I trusted my husband," she said. "I should have trusted my mother-in-law." The judge reviewed the stack of evidence carefully. After 2 hearings, he issued a ruling. Jordan Sinclair was the sole beneficiary of the irrevocable directive and the legal owner of the Sinclair estate. When the gavel fell, Robert slumped forward, as though the ruling had crushed not only his plans but his identity. Outside the courthouse, Jordan stepped into the winter sunlight, exhaling a breath she had been holding for years. Charles approached her. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said. Jordan nodded, blinking away sudden tears. "She already gave me courage," she replied. "I just had to use it." It took 2 weeks for the Sinclair estate to be transferred to Jordan officially. When she arrived at the house with her new keys, the lawn was blanketed in light frost. The porch creaked beneath her feet like it always had, but the sound no longer intimidated her. She unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer. The house was quieter than she'd ever heard it. No booming voice, no sharp footsteps, no tension vibrating under every family interaction. Felt peaceful. Jordan walked through each room slowly. The dining table where she had been belittled countless times. The living room where decisions were made without her. The staircase she climbed to retreat from arguments she never won. She entered Eleanor's old bedroom last. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn open to the morning light. A faint lavender scent lingered in the air. On the dresser sat a wooden jewelry box Jordan had never opened. She lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Some she remembered, some she didn't. One caught her breath. Her grandmother, much younger, holding toddler Jordan on her hip, both laughing freely. Beneath the photos lay a final note. "If you made it here, it means you chose truth over comfort. That is the mark of a leader." Tears blurred Jordan's vision. She pressed the note to her chest. The rest of the house awaited her. Broken in places, beautiful in others, ready to be rebuilt. She walked downstairs and stepped onto the back porch. The garden Eleanor adored was wild and tangled, but the soil was rich. "I'll take care of it," Jordan whispered. "I'll take care of everything." And for the first time in her life, she felt that she truly could. Winter settled over Portland slowly. Jordan spent quiet mornings repairing the Sinclair home one room at a time. She removed the heavy drapes Robert favored and replaced them with soft linen curtains that let sunlight in. She cleared boxes of outdated legal books from Robert's old study and turned the room into a bright workspace for her landscape design projects. In the evenings, she walked through Eleanor's neglected garden, mapping out which plants to restore first. Evan visited often on weekends, helping her prune overgrown branches and haul away dead shrubs. "This place is coming back to life," he said one afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "So are you." Jordan smiled softly. She didn't feel healed yet, but she felt steady. Marilyn visited too, though always with hesitation in her step. One snowy afternoon, she arrived holding a box of old Sinclair family photographs. "I found these in the attic," she said quietly. "I thought you should have them." Jordan invited her inside. They sat on the living room floor flipping through decades of memories. Weddings, birthdays, Eleanor's garden parties, moments of joy hidden between years of tension. Marilyn paused at a picture of Jordan at age 9, holding a ribbon from a school art competition. "Your father should have been proud of you," she whispered. "I should have spoken up." Jordan exhaled. "We can't rewrite the past, Mom, but we can decide what happens next." Marilyn nodded, tears slipping down her cheek. That afternoon marked the beginning of something fragile but genuine, a mother trying to build a bridge she once thought she didn't deserve to cross. And Jordan, for the first time, no longer felt alone in rebuilding the Sinclair legacy. By spring, the garden behind the Sinclair estate burst back into color. Rows of peonies, lavender, and climbing roses replaced the tangled winter mess. Jordan worked daily, kneeling in the dirt, pruning branches, shaping beds, letting each careful cut reshape both the garden and herself. Her clients noticed the shift in her work. Word spread, and soon she received enough new commissions to open her own design studio. She named it Sinclair Landscapes, reclaiming a legacy once used to silence her. At the grand opening, friends, clients, and supportive relatives filled the small studio space. Evan raised a toast. "To Jordan," he said proudly. "To strength built quietly, and to futures built honestly." Jordan blushed as the room applauded. Marilyn hugged her tightly afterward. "Your grandmother would have loved this," she whispered. "She planted seeds everywhere she went. You're doing the same." Meanwhile, Grant faced the consequences of his actions. The Oregon Bar Association suspended him for 6 months pending review of ethical violations. His largest corporate client terminated his contract within days. He moved out of the city temporarily, avoiding contact with most of the family. Robert, stripped of trusteeship and unable to reclaim authority within his own home, relocated to a modest apartment. He did not attend the studio opening. Jordan received no calls from him, no texts, no apologies. But she wasn't waiting for one. Her life was no longer defined by his voice, his expectations, or his disappointment. She built new routines: work, gardening, small dinners with the relatives who stayed in her life. And slowly, the Sinclair home transformed from a monument of control into a sanctuary of growth. Every morning, sunlight streamed through the windows Robert once kept shuttered. Every afternoon, Jordan found peace in the dirt Eleanor once tended. And every evening, she felt the quiet strength Eleanor had left behind. 6 months after reclaiming the Sinclair estate, Jordan stood in the garden Eleanor had loved most. Spring sunlight warmed the soil, the air rich with the scent of lavender and newly opened peonies. She knelt beside a row of fresh seedlings, pink and white varieties Eleanor once said symbolized resilience. As she pressed the final root ball into the earth, something on the porch caught her eye. An envelope. Plain white. No stamp. No return address. Only her name, written in her mother's handwriting. Jordan wiped her hands, picked it up, and opened it slowly. The note inside was short. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up sooner. I'm standing now. Love, Mom." Jordan exhaled softly. She folded the letter and tucked it beside Eleanor's final message in her coat pocket. 2 notes from 2 women who shaped her path in different ways. She walked inside the house, pausing in the doorway to look back at the blooming garden. This house, once filled with fear and authority, now breathed differently. Held laughter. Held healing. It held truth. Jordan placed the letters in a wooden box on the mantel. Her own quiet archive of strength. She brewed coffee, opened the windows to the morning breeze, and let sunlight spill across the floorboards. She did not think about Grant's resentment or Robert's silence. Those battles were finished, their weight no longer hers to bear. Instead, she thought of Eleanor's final line. Legacy is not what you inherit but what you choose to build. And Jordan knew she was building something honest, something steady, something new. She stepped onto the porch, inhaled deeply, and smiled at the garden ready to bloom again. For the first time in her life, the Sinclair house truly felt like home.